At my sister's wedding, my parents demanded I sign over the $500K home that I built from scratch. I came back to consciousness on a marble ballroom floor, lights spinning above me like broken stars. My ears rang, my mouth tasted like pennies. Somewhere close, glass clinked. A woman screamed, and my name echoed as if it didn't belong to me anymore. When I turned my head, pain exploded, and that's when I saw it. A heavy brass centerpiece rolling across the floor, slick with blood. My father stood frozen, his chest heaving. 2 minutes earlier, I had been standing calm, refusing a single demand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone. I just said no. And word unlocked hell. I need to rewind because none of what happened that night makes sense unless you understand who I was before I walked into that ballroom. My name is Cheryl. I'm 30 years old and I work in construction. Not the glamorous kind people like to brag about at dinner parties. The kind where your hands stay rough no matter how much lotion you use. The kind where you measure twice, cut once, and if you mess up, there's no one to blame but yourself. People are often surprised when they hear that. Maybe it's because I don't look the way they expect. I've learned to let that go. I don't build things to impress anyone. I build them because I like knowing something will still be standing long after I leave the room. That instinct came from my grandmother. She was the only person in my family who never treated hard work like a phase I'd grow out of. When I was younger, she used to sit at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, watching me sketch little floor plans on napkins. She'd nod slow and thoughtful and say, "If you're going to build something, make sure it can hold weight." When she passed, she left me a small piece of land outside the city. Nothing fancy. Uneven ground, scrubby trees, the kind of place everyone else dismissed without a second look. My parents called it impractical, a headache, a waste. I saw a foundation. For years, I worked days and built nights and weekends. I learned where every wire ran. I knew which floorboard creaked because I'd nailed it myself. When money ran tight, I ate cheap and kept going. When I got hurt, I taped myself up and finished the job. My family never visited the site. Not once. To them, my real value was always measured against my younger sister, Melissa. She was softer, louder, always needed saving. My parents orbited around her like gravity demanded it. I learned early that being dependable meant being invisible. So when Melissa announced her wedding, everyone called it a fresh start, a celebration, a reason for the whole family to finally come together. I should have known better because families like mine don't come together for joy. They come together when they want something. The wedding was held at one of those downtown venues that looks better in photos than it feels in real life. Tall ceilings, white linens, too many mirrors, everything polished, everything expensive, everything designed to look perfect from the outside. I arrived alone and immediately felt it. That quiet shift in the room, the way people glanced at my shoes. My hands then looked away a second too fast. I found my name on a place card and followed it to a table near the edge of the ballroom. Not terrible, but not close either. Far enough that I couldn't see the head table clearly without leaning. Melissa, of course, was glowing. She floated through the room like she'd been born for it. Dress fitted just right, laugh carrying. My parents followed her everywhere, adjusting details, greeting guests, making sure everyone saw what they'd raised. No one introduced me as anything. When people asked what I did, my mother smiled tightly and said, "Oh, Cheryl's very hands-on," like it was a personality quirk instead of a career. A distant aunt leaned over once and whispered, "That must be tiring," as if building something real was an unfortunate condition. I stayed polite. I always did. Dinner hadn't even been served when my father appeared at my side. Richard didn't sit. He stood too close, one hand on the back of my chair like he was testing its stability. "Good turnout," he said, scanning the room. "Big night for the family." "It is," I replied. My mother joined him moments later, her smile already set. Elaine had that tone ready, the one she used when a conversation was supposed to sound friendly, but wasn't. "We need to talk," she said. "Just for a minute." That's when I felt it, the pressure, like a hand pressing between my shoulders. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't mention my work. They went straight to the point. "Melissa's starting a new chapter," my father said. "She needs stability." Elaine nodded. "A home, something solid, And you already have one. I didn't respond right away. I waited for the punchline. There's a simple solution, she continued. You transfer the house to her just on paper, a symbolic thing. She and her fiancé will take care of it. My stomach tightened. I asked one question. What happens to me? They exchanged a look, the kind that said the answer didn't matter. You're single. My father said, you don't need all that space. You can figure something else out. That was the moment something shifted inside me quietly, permanently. They weren't asking, they were reallocating. I looked across the room at my sister laughing, my parents glowing beside her, and I understood the truth I'd avoided for years. To them, my house wasn't my life's work. It was a resource, and I was expected to hand it over without complaint. I hadn't said no yet, but for the first time, I knew I was going to. They didn't give me time to breathe after that. My father leaned closer, his voice dropping tight with certainty. You'll do the right thing, he said. You always do. My mother nodded, eyes shining in that practiced way that looked like concern but felt like pressure. Think about your sister, she added. This is family. You don't want to be the one who ruins her day. The word ruins landed hard. I glanced around the room, crystal glasses, white flowers, guests smiling, laughing, completely unaware that my life was being negotiated like a line item on a spreadsheet. I thought about the nights I slept in my car to save money, the splinters, the bruises, the quiet pride of locking my own front door for the first time. I looked back at them. I'm not transferring my house, I said. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just steady. My mother's smile cracked first. Don't be difficult, she whispered. We're asking you to help. My father's jaw tightened. You're being selfish. No, I replied. I'm being clear. That's when the temperature dropped. You wouldn't even have that place without this family, he said. Everything you have traces back to us. I felt something inside my chest harden. The land came from Grandma, I said. The house came from me. People nearby had started to notice. Chairs shifted. Conversation slowed. My sister was still on the dance floor, unaware or pretending to be. Elaine's voice sharpened. If you walk away from this, she said, don't expect things to stay the same. I understood what she meant. Holidays, birthdays, the illusion of belonging. I stood up. I'm not giving my home away, I said. Not today, not ever. The silence that followed was absolute. I picked up my bag and turned to leave. I remember thinking how strange it was that no one tried to stop me, how calm I felt finally choosing myself. I took 2 steps. Then I heard movement behind me. Fast. Heavy. I turned just enough to see my father's face twist, something raw and furious breaking through the mask he wore in public. His hand closed around the brass centerpiece from the table. There was no warning, no shout, just the sound of metal cutting through air. And then everything went white. I came back in pieces. Sound first, a sharp, uneven ringing that wouldn't stop like a smoke alarm trapped inside my skull. Then light. Too bright. Too white. My eyes fluttered open and shut, fighting it. My body felt distant, like it was floating somewhere just above the floor. The floor. I realized I wasn't standing anymore. Cold marble pressed against my cheek. My shoulder burned where it had hit first. When I tried to move, nausea surged so fast I had to freeze breathing through it. Somewhere nearby, a woman screamed my name. Someone else shouted for security. I tasted iron and knew without touching my face that I was bleeding. I rolled my head an inch to the side. That's when I saw it. The brass centerpiece lay on its side a few feet away, one curved edge smeared dark. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of decorative object meant to signal wealth, not be used as a weapon. It glinted under the ballroom lights, completely out of place on the floor, like a lie that had finally fallen over. My father was still standing. Richard's chest rose and fell hard, his eyes wide, unfocused. For a split second, he looked almost confused, like he couldn't quite believe what he'd just done. Then his gaze snapped to me, and whatever hesitation had been there vanished. "You don't walk away from me," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You don't turn your back on your family." I tried to speak. Nothing came out. A shadow moved between us. Enough. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Daniel. Melissa's fiancé stepped forward, placing himself squarely in front of me. He didn't touch my father. He didn't raise his hands. He just stood there, shoulders squared, jaw tight, looking at Richard like he was something dangerous that needed to be contained. "Step away from her," Daniel said. My father scoffed. "This doesn't concern you." Daniel didn't move. "It does now." Security guards rushed in, one grabbing my father's arm, another radioing for help. My mother hovered nearby, wringing her hands, her face twisted, not in fear for me, but in panic over the scene being made. "Someone call an ambulance," a voice shouted. As they lifted me onto a stretcher, the room blurred again. Crystal lights streaked overhead. I caught a glimpse of Melissa standing frozen near the cake, her hands over her mouth, eyes wide, not with concern, but with shock that everything was unraveling so publicly. The last thing I remember before the door swung closed was Daniel's voice again. Clear, controlled. "Don't touch her," he said, and this time it sounded like a promise. I drifted in and out as the paramedics worked. They asked my name. I answered. They asked what happened. I said, "My father hit me." Saying it out loud felt unreal, like describing something that had happened to someone else. By the time we reached the hospital, the adrenaline had burned off, leaving pain behind. A deep, pulsing ache that settled behind my eyes and refused to let go. They stitched the cut on my head and told me I had a concussion. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks, trying not to think about the fact that my parents knew exactly where I was. The curtain rustled. I flinched. But it wasn't them. It was Daniel. He looked like he'd been through a storm. His tuxed jacket was gone, his shirt wrinkled, a faint smear of blood on one cuff. He stood there for a second, just looking at me like he needed to make sure I was real. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have stepped in sooner." I swallowed. "You did enough." He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat. His hands were clenched together, knuckles white. "There's something you need to know," he said. "Actually, there's a lot." He explained slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to overwhelm me. Over the past few weeks, things hadn't added up. Melissa had been vague about money. Payments, she said, weren't. Bills appeared, then disappeared. He'd hired someone to take a look just to be safe. What they found, he said, was bad. He told me about the debt. Large amounts, rounded numbers that made my stomach drop. Credit balances stacked on top of each other, missed payments, bills shuffled around to keep them hidden. And then there was the reason for the house. "They weren't asking you to help her," Daniel said, his voice tight. "They were trying to use your place to cover everything, to make it disappear." I closed my eyes. "Of course they were. And that's not all," he continued. "Your parents knew. They've been helping her move things around quietly." I felt something inside me go very still. "I'm not marrying her," he said. "I ended it tonight." I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze. There was anger there and disappointment and something else. Relief, maybe, that the truth was finally out. "You didn't cause this," he added, like he could read my thoughts. They did. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Videos from the wedding had spread fast. Someone had caught the moment my father swung. Another clip showed Daniel stepping in. You couldn't hear every word, but you didn't need to. The image was enough. Security footage filled in the rest. By the afternoon, I had 2 missed calls from an officer asking if I wanted to make a statement. By evening, my phone was lighting up with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Some asked if I was okay. Others asked if I'd considered the consequences. My parents' messages were the hardest. My mother begged me to say it was an accident, to tell them he slipped, that it all happened too fast. My father's message was shorter. "You pushed me." I didn't reply. Instead, I did the one thing I'd never been allowed to do before. I let professionals handle it. I gave my statement. I handed over the footage. I told the truth plainly without embellishment or apology. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand revenge. I just refused to lie. The investigation moved quickly after that. The evidence was clear. Witnesses were plentiful. The story my parents had always relied on, that things could be smoothed over if everyone just kept quiet, finally collapsed under the weight of reality. Weeks later, I sat in a courtroom with my hands folded in my lap, listening as the facts were laid out. The brass centerpiece was entered into evidence. The videos were played. The financial records were referenced, not in dramatic detail, just enough to show motive. My father didn't look at me once. When the judge spoke, her words were calm and precise. She talked about accountability, about boundaries, about how being a parent didn't grant someone ownership over another adult's life. The ruling wasn't explosive. There were no gasps, no cheers, just consequences, and somehow that felt even more powerful. As we left the courtroom, Daniel caught my eye from across the room. He gave me a small nod. Not celebratory, just respectful. For the first time since that night, I felt my shoulders drop. The fight was over, but the silence that followed was louder than anything that came before. The weeks after the hearing passed quietly in a way that felt unfamiliar, but welcome. My father's world shrank fast. The work he'd built his identity around was gone. Doors stopped opening. Invitations dried up. My mother tried to hold everything together with apologies that never quite reached accountability. Melissa disappeared from my life, completely retreating into a silence that spoke louder than any excuse she'd ever given. I focused on healing. The concussion faded slowly. Some mornings the light still hurt. Some nights the memory came back sharp and uninvited. But every day I woke up in my own house, the one I built, the one no one could take from me anymore. Henry checked in often. He never asked for details. He just showed up with groceries or tools or quiet company. One afternoon, standing on the back deck, he said, "You did the hardest part already. You stood your ground. The legal part wrapped up cleanly. No drama, no backroom deals, just a paper trail, a decision, and a line drawn where one had never existed before. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the next demand. I wasn't bracing for disappointment. I was simply living inside a life that finally felt like mine. And that piece, I learned, is what real justice sounds like when the noise fades." A year later, I sit on my back steps at dusk, watching the light settle into the walls I built with my own hands. The house is quiet. No demands, no guilt, just space to breathe. I didn't lose a family that night. I found my boundaries, and I learned that love doesn't ask you to disappear so someone else can stand taller. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you, share your story below and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next.